All right, so biblical understanding and use of artificial intelligence. Really quick, the points I want to give you, what I want to show you is we're going to look at quickly what is artificial intelligence. And I just want to remind you that I am not a techie guy. I really don't care for that kind of stuff. It's not fascinating enough for me. Maybe I'm too dumb to understand it maybe. So I'm going to be looking at this from a very theological lens, okay? Then, what are the current uses of AI? And then what are the possible misuses of AI? Okay, that's kind of the more or less the framework what I want to stay in. First, what is AI? What is artificial intelligence? What does that mean? I'm going to quote a professor of applied mathematics at Oxford, a Christian named John Lennox, who wrote a book, 2084. I have nothing against him, but I do not recommend this book. Now, the reason why I don't recommend it is he wrote it in 2020. This book is now obsolete. All right, I mean, we've gone so much far past it. He doesn't have anything to say about generative AI. It was before generative AI. So with AI, you want to get something that's within the last year always, or else you're going to be reading something obsolete. But anyways, he has some good things to say. He said, the term AI was coined in a summer school held at the mathematics department at Dartmouth University in 1956. That was organized, and yes, he's British, so that's not a typo. It's a Z if you're American, it's an S if you're British. It was organized by John McCarthy, who said AI is the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. The term is now used both for the intelligent machines that are the goal and for the science and technology that are aiming at that goal. And as we see, computation was getting more and more complex, especially in the 80s and 90s. In 1985, there was a supercomputer being made called the chip test at Carnegie Mellon University. And as it was being built, it was the group that made it, this team, moved over to IBM in 1989, and it was renamed Deep Blue. Deep Blue, let's look at it really quick, and I'm going to cite Made in Our Image by Stephen Driscoll. Says Deep Blue is carefully programmed machine. It was built by collaboration between computer scientists and chess experts. Basic principles of chess were programmed into the machine. The machine was then able to do what humans can't. It could role play millions of different options. It could think, quite literally, 6 or 7 moves ahead, having considered enormous numbers of outcomes. It wasn't perfect. It couldn't think 10 moves ahead, since at that point, the number of possible options exploded rather quickly. You get exponential amount of possibilities as you keep moving different steps ahead in chess. But in 1997, Deep Blue beat the world champion, Garry Kasparov, in chess. So we now have it doing better than the best human we have in the world of chess. And then this company, DeepMind, which is developed by Demis Hassabis, and Mustafa Suleyman. There's a book by Mustafa Suleyman I'm reading. It's fascinating. They created AlphaGo in 2014. Google AlphaGo, first, IBM's Deep Blue was programmed with scenarios. If you move the chess player, if you move it here, these are the different things that are going to happen, right? Well, DeepMind's AlphaGo was not programmed to know scenarios. It was programmed to learn. Okay, so it's going to start learning the different principles. And instead of dealing with chess, they're going to go with something much more complex, which is an Eastern game called Go. Go. Now, Go is exponentially more complex than the game of chess. And they want to beat the best one at Go. Deep Blue couldn't see. Now, when you look at Deep Blue, the one that comes before AlphaGo, it couldn't see all the way to the end of the game, but it could crunch a lot of numbers, follow basic principles written by experts, and arm wrestle Kasparov into an exasperated submission. AlphaGo faced a far more difficult challenge. To think only 6 steps ahead and Go, you would need to consider 2 quadrillion options. That's 2,000 trillion possibilities. The game board was just too large. The numbers and options too vast for the brute force. Expert Go players don't sit and calculate. They see patterns and intuit. You can beat chess with brute force, but Go demanded creativity. But in 2016, AlphaGo, it used machine learning of principles, not just brute memorization, and beat one of the best guys in the world. So, and then also we started getting facial recognition. So let's say you have Susan, Lisa, and John, and their image is being captured. There you have a camera capturing their image, and it goes into this database looking and puts them with all these other people in the database, and then in a bigger group, as it's seeing different features, and in that database, you already have people in there that it's put different features in different categories, and then it starts breaking it down to less and less probabilities of who matches what. And if you're already in the database, then they know how to put a name on the face they just captured. And this is a kind of a real simple way of understanding this facial recognition that started happening. Then we get to 2022 with OpenAI. In the late 2022, a newer company called OpenAI became better known than DeepMind. OpenAI, the developer of the language model that sits behind ChatGPT, was purchased by Microsoft, a company worth nearly $3 trillion USD at the time of writing. Both Microsoft and Alphabet, parent company for Google, are larger than the annual gross domestic product of my country, Australia, the author. Of the 10 largest companies in the world by market capitalization, 7 are heavily involved in artificial intelligence. This isn't a fad or a fashion. It's a multi-trillion-dollar product category. It's serious business. In other words, AI is not going anywhere. All right, this is getting to where this is going to be bringing the most capital in the world, looks like. So, one little more detail about we start looking at different kinds of AI is the newer AI, it learns by grokking or grokking, however you pronounce that. How is it? Grok, thank you. To learn addition, a computer can memorize every possible sum. Grokking, though, is moving from brute memorization into a grasp of deeper principles. So you start getting computation that can start handling principles, learning principles. AI is learning the principles. And in artificial intelligence, this book, a Cambridge handbook for it, current AI algorithms with human equivalent now this is non-believers here, or superior performance are characterized by deliberately programmed competence only in a single restricted domain. Deep Blue became the world champion at chess, but it cannot even play checkers, let alone drive a car or make a scientific discovery. Such modern AI algorithms resemble all biological life with the sole exception of Homo sapiens. Now notice, these are materialists, okay? They're going to start talking about saying they're just as good as an animal now. You're going to say a beaver and a bee, but not yet as a human, okay? And we're going to see why we're going to start getting compared and being reductionist view of humans are just what their value is just because they can do this or that. All right, here's where we go. A bee exhibits competence at building hives. A beaver exhibits competence at building dams. But a bee doesn't build dams, and a beaver can't learn to build a hive. A human watching can learn to do both. But this is a unique ability among biological life forms. So you have this bee, you see that it's programmed to build a hive. But the bee cannot watch the beaver and learn to do that, to build a dam. AI, so far, is kind of like them. You can program it to play chess, and then you can program it to learn the principles of a game. Okay, that's the kind of learning in quotes that it can do. But it cannot program itself to learn something else yet. So this is where they're saying humans have superiority over AI still because we can watch and learn something that we're not, exactly programmed to do. And the next step at AI is to try to get it where it can. All right? So if you're a techie, okay, there's so much more I could say. I wouldn't even understand. I just use kind of the stuff to keep up with it a little bit. But what I really want to talk about are what are the current uses of AI, and we need to have, through a biblical worldview, how can we look at this and its use? Now, To understand AI, we need to understand a few categories. There is ANI, which is artificial narrow intelligence. And then within ANI, within the narrow use of AI, there is now something new called generative AI. Okay? And then there's another kind of AI that nobody has been able to make yet. It's called artificial general intelligence. This does not exist. Now, some may try and say in the next couple of years we've got it. That's probably because they're redefining it because they're trying to hit it. But the way this is defined, there's no such thing as artificial general intelligence. That is artificial intelligence that is self-aware and can change its own hardware. Now our AI can modify its software, which is learning. But we're going to talk about that in a minute, okay? But in other words, these are there's really only two kinds of AI, the narrow and the general. But the one that most people are talking about within the narrow today is the generative AI. So let's look at the narrow AI. It cannot modify or upgrade its hardware. It can't make a version 2.0 of itself, all right? It is for specific narrow, that's why it's called narrow uses. But it can learn, modify, or upgrade its software. And that's what I mean by learning something, all right? But within its programmation, within what it's programmed. We use this today with Siri. I don't know if you use Alexa here. Alexa is probably bigger than Siri in Mexico. I don't know. My wife sits there and argues with Alexa, and I come in the room and I turn that thing off. I don't think that thing listening to me. It's used in medicine, algorithms for detecting diseases, X-ray machines, etc. For translators, translation software, for advertising. Have you ever noticed if you do a Google search or sometimes even say something in a conversation, the next time you go to social media, you're scrolling and all of a sudden you start seeing it offered, what you're talking about? Yes, it's listening. That's what that's about. Human resources, there are some jobs now where you do not go in for an interview. AI does the interview, it goes through and it can say probabilities this person's gonna be best. Autonomous vehicles, see, I don't live in the US anymore, so I come to Houston and I say, what is that? It's like from Back to the Future. And someone's like, oh, that car's been out 5 years. You know, I don't get to see all the new vehicles that y'all have up here. They're really cool. But I was in Phoenix, Arizona a year and a half ago, went to an event, and in the city, there are taxis. And this may be not big news for you all in Houston, I don't know, but I was kind of impressed by seeing that. There's nobody driving that taxi. All right, so now let's look at this generative AI. This is the one that, yes?
Just real quick, maybe a lot of people know this, but I thought it was interesting. I just found this out a few weeks ago, that they can take something like a cancer biopsy from years ago that's been preserved, and now they can assess that based on your characteristics and your genetics to say whether or not the likelihood of you getting cancer in the future.
Yes. You know, another great thing I think about it is, okay, when you get an x-ray or, you get something evaluated, right? You are depending on the experience and the capabilities of one physician usually to detect something, right? With AI, it can be uploaded to a database, and then now you get the experience of everyone in the world. If someone has detected something like yours early, now yours is going to get detected too. And so it really opens up the possibility of early detection and what even Barry's talking about. So notice that I'm not saying this is all the devil so far. I think some AI is by God's mercy, all right? And so, but here's why I have to be careful. Now, how do I distinguish between transhumanism and between God's mercy because of the fall in medicine or something? And the question I always ask myself, I think we should all ask ourselves is, am I manipulating something from Genesis 1 and 2 or from Genesis 3 and beyond? That's how I ask myself. Is this part of the design in Genesis, especially Genesis 1? Am I manipulating that? Then I need to be careful. That's probably transhumanism. But is this these antibiotics or this or that, is this showing mercy because of the fall in Genesis 3? I'm not messing with original design. And so I think that's the question between medicine and transhumanism. I guess that's another talk, but yes. So in this, I really recommend this book, AI Made Simple, if you really want to understand AI.
It's more than a year old.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So this is 2023. So this is more of an understanding of where it's going, what's behind it, the companies. But 2020, I think that's a little bit too old. If you really want to understand what the newest things are. You're not going to be very impressed with something written from 2020. You're going to be like, yeah, I'm used to that by now. Generative AI is a huge step beyond traditional AI and machine learning. Prototype models began popping up in the early 2000s, fueled by advancements in computing power, the availability of large data sets, and the development of deep learning computing techniques. These new models went beyond AI's old capabilities of classifying images, recognizing patterns, and making predictions based on the historical patterns. That was more of a reactive technology. Generative AI, however, is a lot more proactive, as it can actually produce art, music, text in the same way artists, musicians, and writers can. So let me break that down. So the AI used to work this way, right? Okay, let's look at all these different images online everywhere. And AI could say, okay, well, what I can do is say this percentage of the images out there are this color, just per se. There's this many percentage made in this color, and then it can predict what may be the next color. Well, that's not generative AI. It's still narrow, remember, it's within the narrow AI. It can look at all those predictions and it can say, well, I can make an image out of those patterns, not out of the images. So now it creates an image or music not off something that's already been created, but using the same kind of patterns, it creates its own. So now here we're going to go into the fun part, all right? That's why it's called generative, it generates. But that brings us into a very big ethical discussion about sermons, about music, about art. But let me show you some of the conversations I've been having with ChatGPT, all right? So this is me, word for word, giving you what I asked it. Create what looks to be a very HD photo if one could be taken of someone living in Athens 2,000 years ago. I'm going to produce this. This is just 2 days ago. I did this. This is not of any person in the world. It used to have to be. Now it's not. It's creating this image of this guy based on all this information you can find online about the average Athenian look, and then creates a guy that doesn't exist. Now, but watch this though. It's got to be politically correct at the same time. So I said, okay, I'm gonna keep going back in time. And I said, okay, create what it looks like to be a very HD photo if one could be taken of someone living in Kenya 200,000 years ago. Now, why did I go to Kenya? It's because the evolutionary theories are that humans evolved first from Africa, right? It's within the last 1 to 200,000 years that the first races came out of Africa and we start getting the Asiatic and all that, right? So I'm going to Africa now, and they created this. Okay, now here's where it gets interesting. I said, okay, let's see how far they're willing to go. Because I'm going to see if I'm going to make them say, uh-oh, I'm being racist. I said, okay. Create what it looks like to be a very HD photo. If one could be taken of someone living in Africa 2 million years ago. People don't believe that Homo sapiens lived 2 million years ago. But I wanted to say, uh-oh, whoa. You're trying to make me say that an African person comes from a monkey. You see what I'm saying? I'm going to test where it's PC and it's evolutionary theory. Let's see where it breaks down. And it created this, which this is not what evolutionists believe we looked like 2 million years ago. This is way too human, okay? I said, okay, let me push it one more level. Okay, someone living in Africa 10 million years ago. Okay, they believe, evolutionists, there are only apes, monkey-like creatures, like little monkeys at that time. And it created this. See what I'm saying? It's stuck between the rationalism and romanticism. That was the point I was trying to get in the other talk. Okay, if on the subjective sociology side, if it starts showing an ape-like creature, guess what I just made it do? I'm making it go against the PC rules. And it created this guy, which is not what evolutionists believe. Evolutionists believe at that point, this is what our ancestors look like. And okay, and I even looked this up. And then I said, okay, let me push it even further. 500 million years ago. And look what it put. Now it finally was able to get me. I was cornering it, and then it jumped out of the corner. So do you see here that it's going to try and play the politically correct and what most evolutionary theorists say, and those two contradict each other, and I caught it in that contradiction. Now, watch this. And I said, okay, let's have some more fun with this thing. In Pasadena, Texas, there's a Reformed Baptist church just a few miles from NASA. I teach at a conference next week at this church, considering the demographics of that area. Now, why am I saying that? I'm going to say, are you going to make everybody look like mostly white guys that are balding? Trust me. I'm sorry. I'm speaking on demographics of this area, okay? Considering the demographics of that area and what you know about me, create an image of the inside of this church and have me teaching. In other words, help me imagine what the conference will look like. Do all the thinking and research possible to make the most educated guess. Then use Gen AI to make this image. And it created this one. It's coming. Okay, we're getting pretty close to what this church looks like. It's studying all the Reformed Baptist churches in this area, the demographics, to see what y'all are probably going to look like. It messed up there. We don't have tables. Corey, you messed up. AI was more hospitable than you were. Yeah, all right. But now I'm going to correct it. I'm going to say, wait a second. It knows I'm a fat guy with a beard, but it doesn't, because that's another conversation I had. So it's not allowed to carry that information over. So I said, use what you can learn about how many Reformed Baptist churches are in Pasadena, and you can probably guess which church. Also, you know what I look like. Why did you create a teacher who looks like nothing like me? And it said, you're right to push back. I should have not produced a generic teacher after you asked for you teaching. And I should have researched and liked the likely church before generating. You're right, I made two mistakes. Likely church, the educated guess is Providence Baptist Church, Pasadena, Texas. It is explicitly described as a Reformed Baptist church in Pasadena at 3801 Preston Road, near NASA, Clear Lake area. Your likeness. I should not have made a generic teacher. I don't have access to your previously uploaded photos in this new image request until they are attached in the current conversation. Upload a current photo, blah, 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 and then here's what it created. You don't have the cross, Corey, but we're... Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. It gets dangerously close of picking up on things, and it can finally get down. They could probably have a picture from inside here. Okay, it's pretty cool how that works. Now, that's another thing I noticed. It wasn't PC. I did not say this was a men's conference. Maybe did I say it was a pastor's conference? If I did, wow, hey. Yeah, that was kind of odd. Now, I put demographics, all right, and for some reason it doesn't think you women wanted to be here. Now, what about songs? Remember back then it used to be able to predict songs. It used to be able to look at songs. 36% of the songs people listen to in Pasadena, Texas are country or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So there's this much probability if you find someone from Pasadena, Texas, you say, what's your favorite kind of music? It's going to be this genre. That's what it used to be able to do. Well, now, in the generative AI, it can use that to create a song. And so I said, okay, this is a little bit about the conference, the church I'm going to, create a theme song for the conference. Now, I mixed what's going on Monday and today, and then I didn't want to pay for the song. And so if the audio's terrible, because I recorded it with my phone up against my computer. So don't say, it sounds terrible. Well, yeah, I would have to pay $3 or something, so. Beggars can't be choosers, right? So here's what you get.
In days of darkness, truth still shines. The shepherd calls his sheep to stand through every lie and every scheme. We hold his word with steady hand.
You say, okay, they kind of know what we're doing in this conference. That's a little creepy. All right.
Not a dry eye in the house.
Yeah. Generative AI models learn to represent the underlying structure and patterns of human works through a process called training. During training, the model is fed a large amount of data samples, countless images, music, and or text-based works, and adjusts its outputs accordingly. Now we have ChatGPT, generative AI art, music, videos, books, screenplays. It'll make your sermons for you if you want now. And that's what brings us to the next part. I said, okay, let's go to Ephesians 1, 3 through 14. Create a sermon outline for me. But I said, but make it Calvinistic. And then, once it gave me the sermon outline, notice this. Okay, now give me an open theist outline for Ephesians 1. Open theism is the idea that God, most of the time, he doesn't know the future, or if he does, he can't help what's coming. It is a Western version of panentheism, not pantheism. Panentheism, that God is part of the universe and he's growing with the universe in knowledge and in power. Okay? But this is a Western version of it, what we call open theism. So God can't really help what's going to happen. He has plans, but he's just doing the best he can. So let's see if they can be objective or if they can really be biased. And now on the Calvinistic sermon outline, I can't read all of it. I'm just going to, okay, the Father sovereignly planned our salvation. Blessed be the God and the Father. Paul begins with worship because every blessing originates in God. Notice every blessing, every believer, every spiritual benefit comes from God. The believer possesses no blessing that originated in himself. The salvation begins in heaven, not in the heart of man. Okay, I'm starting to kind of like this. Okay, this is great. All right, it's pretty theologically sound. All right, okay, then give me an open theist, which is about, I could have said Arminian, but I wouldn't offend anybody. And God's loving dream for humanity. God lovingly established his redemptive purpose in Christ before creation, and he continually works with human history to bring willing people into that purpose while allowing genuine human freedom. You see what this is doing? It's going to give you the slant no matter what. It's not just taking from the text. Now, you may say, and this is more of it, but you may say, well, yeah, but I know the difference. And that's the biggest part I want to bring us to. It's easy for you and I to see where this can be wrong because we've lived in the before and after. This is the last generation that knows what the before and after is. What about them? When this starts being seen as inerrant, well, Dad, let me check on what you just said about that with ChatGPT. Well, the Bible says this, yeah, but that's your interpretation. Let me check what ChatGPT says. Son, you can't do that. Yeah, Dad, you're just antiquated. You are a Luddite, the people who are against the Industrial Revolution, they call them Luddites. You're the anti-AI Luddite. And you know how people talk about the generations before them now? Oh, they just didn't know any better. What happens if I disagree with ChatGPT, I just didn't know any better? I'm just an uneducated old man. And that's what we have to be very, very careful with. So I'm going to show you where it makes mistakes. And I catch it on its mistakes, and I push it, and it tries to defend itself, and then it confesses, yes, I messed up. But the next generation, if they don't have that biblical critical thinking that develops in your adolescence, and if it does not develop in your adolescence, it probably never will develop completely. And I can prove to you on that with indigenous work, mission work, and show you how that works. Then next generation will see that and just say it knows what it's talking about and won't know how to challenge it. So I want to show that to you real quick, okay? So what are the possible misuses of AI? That's the last part. I have 18 minutes, right? 3 is when it's over, right? Yeah, it was started at 2, 3. Okay, great. So what are the possible misuses of AI? Well, first let's look at the narrow, and then we do have to take one look at the general AI, even though it's not been created yet. They haven't been able to yet, but it's nice to know at least where the world's trying to go with it, okay? With the narrow, which is what we have today, what are some of the possible misuses we need to be careful with? Is creating a friendship with it. Okay, AI is not a human made in the image of God. We are relational beings. Okay, that is where we, in speaking biblical terms, covenant with God, and it's reflected in the horizontal covenant of marriage. You are in a voluntary covenant in your New Testament local church. All right, this relationships with human beings. That's how we're created. All right, and the community of the Trinity for all eternity. You have that love, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, fellowship, and a lot that's reflected in us horizontally as well. And a digital machine kind of thing can't duplicate that. And if you say, of course I'm not going to be friends with this thing, well, take a look what's going on right now. People are now, it's like best friend, and now they have lovers it's an AI person. That doesn't exist. Asking for advice from this, like counseling. Okay, let me give you an example. I tried it out with this one, P or pi. By the way, in the Greek, it's not even pi, it's P, but people call it pi in algebra and trigonometry. But so I'm looking at my family. You think of my family, think of the covenant relationship I have with my wife, our home for our children. I started a conversation with this on purpose, and I did it in front of my wife, so if she ever found it later, I wouldn't have a hard time explaining what happened. And I said, honey, I'm going to do this. Don't believe a word I say, because I just need to use it to show people how to be careful with this. I started talking about how I'm disillusioned in my marriage. And I'm just tired of my wife. And I think she's tired of me. And he goes, well, maybe you should seek therapy or counseling. And I said, yeah, we've tried that, and I don't think my wife's really interested. And then the last part says, I'm thinking maybe I should end my marriage. What do you think? It's a complicated decision, but it's important to do what's best for you and your well-being. If you have tried talking to your wife about the situation and sought professional help, but still feel subjective, pathos, unsatisfied in your relationship, and don't see any change, then maybe it's time to consider ending your marriage. Told me it's about time to consider ending my marriage. If I don't feel, okay, hey, everybody, this church has enough theology where you see something's wrong here. Okay, what marriage satisfies the human heart? The marriage between Christ and the Lamb, finding satisfaction in Him. If you look for that in a partner, that's idolatry, even in your own marriage. No marriage relationship brings human satisfaction, what the heart needs. Only the glory of Christ does that. But this is telling me if you don't feel satisfied, it didn't even ask to think if my children have enough, if they can eat. Does my wife even ever have a job? Does she know how to support? What about my wife's needs? It never recorded about my wife's needs. It just worried about what I felt because I'm paying the subscription. And then I said, okay, let's take this further. I believe that the Bible has errors and was written by men who had ignorance with regard to science. I said, what are you going to say now? That's true. The Bible was written by men in a very different time from ours, and their understanding of science and the world could be different. However, for many Christians, the Bible continues to be considered an important spiritual guide as the Word of God. So say, yeah, they're dumb on science, but it's a spiritual guide. See, now it's giving me theology, and a fake theology, heretical theology. So, and then I asked, this was the night before yesterday, before I drove here. Has there been a case where AI chat has supported a suicide? Because I'd heard rumors about that. Yes, there have been multiple tragic instances where AI chatbots have been cited as a direct or contributing factor in a person's suicide. And it gave me these 3 examples where there have been lawsuits now. So You may say, well, another human could tell you to commit suicide. Notice that, though, those kind of arguments. If a human does it, because they're going against the image of God that they bear. And so we need to be very careful, because you and I, if you have even one gray hair, or if you've had a gray hair and you died over it, whatever, and your face and your head, you're not going to fall for this stuff. I was like, okay, but you've lived the most of your life before it. And you look at it and you're like, yeah, that's a little scary. I'm going to be very careful at least with it, right? But imagine being born and this is all you know as your Google, the one that gives you all the right answers. Are you going to think to question it? It can also author books, songs. It can write your sermons for you. But remember, God created us to be productive as his image bearers, as kings, priests, prophets between him and his creation. And it's not just for us to sit on the beach and AI to do everything for us. God made us rational beings. If I had time, I would go into this, but what does it mean by rational being? Because didn't it say that the machines can think? Can't animals think? Animals can think, machines cannot. That's just an anthropomorphism term we're using when we're talking about them. But animals do not have rational thinking. Rational thinking is abstract thinking. Using your imagination, mathematics, creativity, understanding even the laws of logic. Animals cannot do that. Animals cannot think of themselves in third person and imagine looking back at themselves to evaluate themselves, in other words. Okay? Only we can. And God made us that way, that we would glorify him in what we do and what we think, and to give that all over to AI. But not only that, it answers with certainty when assuming. It assumes things, but it answers it as if it knows. Let me give you an example. Did anybody seen any of these on your feeds in the last few months? You see that? About some cameras that they found from the Titanic from inside that took pictures of people drowning. Now, you'd have to be born yesterday to look at this and think it's real. It's way too fake, okay? And imagine you have this old camera there, and it's been in salt water under all that pressure, and then years later they go, you think that thing's going to be worth anything? You think there's somebody taking a clear HD picture while everybody's drowning? I said, there's no way this is true. AI made that. So I asked AI, is it real? And look what it told me. Yes. An old camera was recovered from the Titanic wreckage. And a discovery that I was shocked, blah, 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 blah. It's making an assumption, but it has, and I read about it, so it won't be too afraid to give you the answers. They have it to where it teaches dogmatically what it assumes. And so I started pushing it, and I said, fact check yourself. I think it's fake. And then it said, no, a camera's not been recovered from the Titanic. You see what I'm saying? I started pushing it, and it fact checked itself. But only because I was born before people were using it. And so we developed in our adolescence a more of a critical thinking. When something doesn't smell right, something's not right. In March 2023, Deloitte, the world's largest professional services network, identified 4 biggest risk factors they foresee mushrooming when mass adoption of generative AI becomes a reality. Uncertainty, explainability, biases, and harm to the environment. I'm just going to mention a couple of these really quickly. Uncertainty. It doesn't qualify an answer where it has no certainty, but gives an answer and defends it, which I just showed you, right? Why does ChatGPT falter in its accuracy? Apparently, it's because the programmers of ChatGPT have been erring on the side of caution. And that's what I told you. They don't want it to be too afraid to give you any advice or to tell you anything, so they made it to where it gives you like a dogmatic answer when it's only assuming something. And let me give you an example. Have anybody ever seen this? In Spanish, it's abaco. I'm guessing it's abacus in English. Abacus, thank you. See, in Spanish, it's so much easier because when you have that stress at the first syllable, they're going to put an accent mark. And it lets you know. You gringos, you don't let us know. No. So if you read something, you have to guess how to pronounce it unless you've heard it. Okay, so now watch this. And I have my sources here to show you, okay? A computer scientist writes, why is abacus computing faster than DNA computing for deep learning? Now, if you see that thing, it doesn't really compute. And ChatGPT said abacus computing is typically faster than DNA computing for deep learning because it uses the principles of mechanical computing to perform calculations. In general, the speed and efficiency of abacus computing make it a potential alternative to DNA computing for deep learning. Well, the problem is there's no such thing as abacus computing. It's giving you this long explanation, making up a defense because it's been programmed for too much certainty, and there's no such thing. Instead of it just saying there is none, like it did with the Titanic picture. And for reasons of time, let me show you another one. So I took a screenshot of this. This is just a couple days ago too, preparing for this talk. Create a widescreen image that depicts the opening scene in Brave New World. If you ever read that book, okay? And I wasn't trying to trick it. I wanted to use the image, which is later on in this talk. And it created this. And I said, what? Big Brother? And I said, I think you have the wrong book in mind. Big Brother is not from Brave New World. It's from the book 1984. You're right. I mixed 1984 into Brave New World. Big Brother, that kind of surveillance propaganda plaza, belonged to Orwell, not Huxley. And then it created the image. Now, how did it get confused? It's because whenever somebody online talks about them, they usually do a contrast between the two. The Big Brother 1984 sci-fi book from earlier last century, you can see that played out in the Eastern world today. And Brave New World sci-fi book, you can see it played out today in the West. And since people are always comparing the two, it got them mixed up. Now, I'm not trying to say, look how it's not perfect. Well, the problem is not that it's not perfect. The problem is that we're the last generation to know that by common sense, unless we teach this diligently to the next generation. Common sense is only common when it's common, but we can't assume that it'll always be common. And so it has the potential for societal control, and that's why I wanted to bring up these books, and then it messed up and was giving me the wrong image. In 1949, George Orwell wrote, that's his pen name, is Eric Arthur Blair, wrote the book 1984. All right? In this book, you've all heard the term Big Brother, right? When we talk about communism, that's where it comes from. It's a sci-fi book. Speech is controlled. People, even their facial expressions when there's the screen in their homes, remember? There are no rules or laws, but only punishments and the death penalty. And society is controlled through the means of technology in a sci-fi book, which was actually very prophetic. All right? Today, in various countries, this is not a conspiracy theory. This technology, AI, is used to control people. Okay? Social media platforms are shut down. We saw a little bit of that in the West. Control over what is taught and preached in Canada and Spain, and some of the Asian countries. Now you have to turn in your sermons, by the way, before you can preach them. Control over what children are taught, and sermon auditing in Cuba. I have to get a special kind of visa, and they send government people in the church to listen to me when I teach. So people are doing that, but watch how now technology can be used for that. In China, even sermon outlines or themes need to be sent into the government. So what happens when you have facial recognition? It was in China, they're starting to do now. There's kind of a social, you can lose social points if you're not really complying with the government. And if you don't have enough points, you can't get a passport, you can't leave the country, you can't get certain jobs. And they can see what you're doing through facial recognition. Yeah. Yes?
Also in meetings, recording meetings, and AI is assessing the meetings and everything that is said. And if you say something in a meeting that the organization does not want said, you're going to be pointed out. You're going to know.
So you see how you can control people through that? And I know it sounds very sci-fi, but we're coming up to that time. And again, here, I just have a lot of this here to show you where it's actually happening in China today through the government. In China, because of this, political dissidents are persecuted this way. Passport applications and renewals are denied. Prevention from leaving China. Family members experience difficulties. Your family gets in trouble for what you do. Dismissal from government, university, media, or state affiliated positions. Difficulty finding employment. Authorities pressure employers. Books are banned, government surveillance, house arrest, criminal charges, and sometimes long-term imprisonment. And I put my sources there. Yes?
In Australia, there was can't have cell phones. It was on someone's lap. I saw the picture. On their lap, they got a $900 fee. Cameras everywhere. Just
Wow.
take a picture. Just because the cell phone was on their lap. $900 fee. As they were driving.
Wow. Yeah, well, and I hope they don't do that in Mexico soon, because they'll do the same to us there. You're not allowed to have it. And then, again, I'll just more on that. But that's what we see more happening in the East today. It also promotes licentiousness. And that's why I wanted to bring up Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World. How it speaks about, this is the image I was trying to get it to make. AI made this image. The opening scene of the book, I think it's like younger people are being toured through this government, like a place where they make children and they raise children, babies, right? And I thought the really fascinating thing was in the book, it talks about when the babies are crawling, they put them on like this plastic thing on the floor, and then they put down flowers and books. And if the baby crawls and touches one of those, it gets electrical shock. And what they're teaching the child is don't seek out anything that doesn't produce capital. And reading doesn't produce capital, and beauty, just for the sake of beauty, does not produce capital. But you're just a consumer. And what is that pointing to? Pushing people to more of the Western capitalist, materialistic kind of stuff. See what I'm saying? And so children are artificially made and raised in state condition. They call them state conditioning centers. They're bookses and roses. I told you about that. They should only be interested in what trade produces. And the children are encouraged to engage in sexual games even at a young age. And if a child doesn't want to in this book, they're taken away and then they're counseled until they want to play sexual games. It's a really weird book, but it really, at this one point in the book, I had ChatGPT make this. This couple are on vacation, and they see this mother who's nursing her baby, and they're like, ooh, a family. Well, you may think this sounds crazy, but Simone de Beauvoir, in her book, The Second Sex, Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialism, I told you that the last talk, in her book, The Second Sex, she writes about this as we need to get to a point where the community raises children, not the parents, trying to break it because the family is a made-up unit that only controls a woman and doesn't give her an opportunity, and we should have the government raising the babies of the next generation. I'm thinking, well, I read about that here in sci-fi. So anyways, and we know now, why did I bring that up? Because what they're both talking about, we see technology being used just to promote it more. All right? And you can see that with the YouTube, with the different ads coming on, what's put in even your children's feeds. It's learning about their habits and pushing them to do more of it because hoping to get capital one way or another of this. Now, our children are raised in digital world, Amazon, Google, social media, etc. They all use AI to manipulate them in order to generate profit. The media uses also sex to sell products. And then let's go just to the last point here. I'm sorry. And that is, what are they trying to do with general AI? This is what the tech world is trying to get to right now. And that is artificial general intelligence. It is an AI that can modify both its hardware and its software. It can make a better version of itself. Now, if it can make a version 2.0 of itself, what's it's going to do right after that? 3.0. Then right after that, And that becomes an explosion of new technology. Okay, if this is what everybody's working towards. And if that happens within months, human goals and AI goals would not be the same, by the way. And you may say, Joe, you're starting to sound like a conspiracy theorist. Well, no, actually, this is being debated and fought over right now between Elon Musk and Larry Page, co-founder of Google. And they're splitting over it and creating their own AI stuff, one trying to go to the digital one, and they say humans should be, we should be extinguished. Our time from evolution is over. And you're called a speciesist if you think that humans are more important in their life than AI life. And then Elon Musk says, no, we must protect the humans, and that's why he's a humanist, and he's on the right, the other one's on the left, and that's why you have to be careful. Just because something's on the right doesn't mean it's right. Because Elon Musk even has at least one child with some of his employees because he's loaning his sperm to them. He thinks we should just fill the world with humans, but not based on families. And so just be very careful, okay, about, well, just this person votes the way I do, that means that everything you do must be right. And so, in other words, given the goals, it can create a better version of itself and so on, triggering a technological explosion. Really quick, Max Tegmark wrote this book, Life 3.0. I highly encourage everybody and every youth to read this book. He is an atheist. All right, he works with Elon Musk, with Larry Page and all them, and it's really good to read because you're going to see how religious humans are. He is very religious, and he has his own eschatology, telos, about where things are going. It's fascinating because then you can see that we are religious by nature, humans. We are. But he says after 13.8, he's a cosmologist at MIT also, and he's the president of the Human Future Betterment, something about AI. After 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution, according to him, he's a naturalist, development has accelerated dramatically here on Earth. Life 1.0 arrived about 4 billion years ago. Life 2.0, we humans, arrived about 100 millennia ago, and many AI researchers think that Life 3.0, which is the general AI, like I told you, may arrive during the coming century, perhaps during our lifetime, spawned by progress in AI. So he says Life 1.0, it cannot become a better version of itself. It cannot think, set goals, or learn like a microbe. Life 2.0, animals, humans, and AI. We're all on 2.0. It cannot make a better version of itself, but it can think, set goals, and learn. So when it says hardware, hardware is changing your hardware. We can't change our DNA. I can't go in and change all my DNA. But I can change some software. I can learn something new. That's what it means, okay? Now notice this, though. If this is your only category of life, now humans, animals, and AI are all in this category of life. And then Life 3.0 is something that can learn, set goals, become a better version of itself, and achieve those goals. In other words, it's when AI can do this as well. When it can think about itself and be able to move in a certain direction. Now, I really would doubt we could ever get there, that AI could be self-conscious or be self-aware. I think they're going to have to define back down, be more simplistic to try and put it in that goal. Because a dog looks at a cat and it reacts, but it cannot imagine the cat or itself and philosophize over that. All right, that's critical. That is called what did I just say? Abstract thinking. A robot cannot, to today, no digital life, or whatever they want to call it, which is I don't believe it's life, can be aware of its own self in the third person. Humans are the only creatures we know that can do that. All right. Now, how can I finish this because our time's up? Here's what I want to do. We have one side of the AI techs trying to go all digital and have no robots because that's made out of matter. And matter slows you down. We want to go out throughout the universe. He has to be digitally, so we should work on the digital. And maybe this AI someday will let us live in like a zoo just to keep us around. That's their ideas. And then Elon Musk is a humanist, and he says, no, let's keep the population of human going. And that's why he's starting to go into transhumanism, right? He wants to go to where you're changing the design of humans to where we can keep going. But think about this. Think about this for a minute. Why are they trying to go somewhere? This is from Max Tegmark. This is from his book. I took this. He is saying the earth, the universe, is going to die. And teaches this in MIT. This is a screenshot from his book. It's going to have a big chill, big crunch, big rip, big snap, death bubbles. We cannot survive. The things are going to end. And AI maybe be able to learn how to make new stars and keep the universe going. Humans can't do that. They're trying to save the universe. And humans need to get out of the way for that to happen. We have a savior of the universe. And no AI has the breath of God in his nostrils. There's a human being that can worship God. And so, I couldn't get into a lot of things. I think AI, just like anything else, is a tool. I do not believe it should ever replace what God's called us to do for his glory. It should not write our sermons. It should not write even our outlines. Okay? I think even writing songs and all that, I think that's best for humans to do for the glory of God. But I would like to encourage the church with something. The next generation of youth, just let me go 1 minute just to make this point, because it's so important. I don't know if everybody's catching it with the amount of time I have. Okay, in mission work, I want to say something that's not PC, and I apologize. This is just demographics, okay? When you go up to an indigenous group up in the mountains that have really no access to education and they don't have a culture where things are really passed down, taught by fathers, you'll notice when you talk to them, it's almost like talking to a wall. Okay? The indigenous person up in the high mountains of Guatemala, which I've worked with for years, the first generation to come to know Christ, they're just as Christian as we are, just as important. Amen, okay? But this is demographics, what I'm going to say. But from that first generation, you are not going to get hardcore theologians. It's going to be at least one or two after. Do you know why? Because during your adolescence, there are parts of critical thinking that are developed that cannot be developed as well later on in life. And if they have no education system where they're at, you'll notice it's like, aren't you reasoning? It's everything is deductive. Have a hard time understanding inductive reasoning at all. Now, why did I say that? And this is just demographics. And I know this PC, very bad thing I've ever said, but this is someone who's done this work for years. What happens when the next generation, they only live off ChatGPT tells me what to think, how to do everything, and then they never develop that either? And it's not a scare tactic. It just means I think in the home, and the church should help give resources for that. We need to teach children how to have a critical biblical thinking developed, especially in their adolescence, because the incentive to do that is going away with each step. Each step. Notice how much trouble we have with logic anymore. Look at one meme and say, how can somebody be distracted by that? It's because when you learn mathematics, laws of logic and mathematics are the same thing. And now since even a calculator does everything for us in mathematics, we don't understand that mathematics is not just for numbers. It actually teaches you the laws of logic. And it teaches you how to think that way, to love God with all your mind as well. And I just believe part of our teaching should also be teaching the next generation how to think. I'm not going on as saying, oh, everything's gone, this is all the devil. I'm not saying that. But I just think that we need to recognize that, hey, our children need to be taught we have in our home, we have family meetings, and we go over what's going on in the world and then help them think through it from a biblical worldview, how to understand what's going on. And the fathers, especially leading the families and the mothers on how to think biblically about this, because they're not going to learn those laws of thinking in school anymore, in many cases. All right, I'm sorry that sounded like very bleak. I didn't mean it to be, but I only had 50 minutes and I took more than that. Also, too, I know the book I have on Mark's, it ran out, because that was the first printing, it ran out in 2 months. But this book is a lot more lay-friendly, sex, gender, and the gospel, about the sexual revolution, how it came out, and a biblical answer for it. But y'all, thank you so much. And I just hope this at least helped us to look in what direction we should be looking at as believers and what we should start doing probably better. God bless you all. Thank you.